Hello and welcome. I am Thomas Porteous and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Tribal fighters backed by Syria's government clashed with Druze forces near Sweida, a day after army units pulled back. The Syrian Observatory reported fighting between Bedouin allies of Damascus and Druze defenders, with both sides confirming gunfire exchanges. The Russian Defense Ministry claims its air defences has destroyed 73 Ukrainian drones overnight, including 3 targeting Moscow, with 31 intercepted over the Bryansk region near the Ukrainian border. Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin reported no casualties or damage as emergency services examined fallen drone debris. US Republicans have now approved President Donald Trump's plan to slash $9 billion in funding for foreign aid and public broadcasting, framing it as a move to prioritize American interests, while the lawmakers vowed that this was only the beginning of broader spending cuts. President Trump has also threatened to sue the Wall Street Journal and Rupert Murdoch over a report claiming he wrote a sexually suggested letter to Jeffrey Epstein in 2003, according to media reports. Trump denounced the story as fake and defamatory on his Truth Social amid growing scrutiny of his past ties to the late sex offender. Brazilian President Lula da Silva has slammed US President Donald Trump's plan to impose a 50% tariff on Brazilian imports starting in August, calling it unacceptable blackmail and vowing not to take orders from any foreigner. The escalating trade spat follows Trump's claims of unfair practices and treatment of ex-President Jair Bolsonaro. Taiwan will not approve confrontation with China and does not seek conflict, Taiwanese Vice President said, while condemning Beijing's aggressive military posturing and as counterproductive. While speaking in Taipei, Hassao stressed that Taiwan's peace-loving people reject China's claims over the island. The United Nations Refugee Agency has warned that up to 11.6 million refugees may lose access to humanitarian aid due to severe funding cuts, according to Dominique Hyde, the UNHCR's Director of External Relations. Speaking today, Hyde called the situation dramatic and urged donors to act to prevent a worsening humanitarian crisis. US Senator Tom Cotton has requested clarity from Defense Secretary Hegseth on Microsoft's reported use of Chinese engineers in maintaining US military cloud systems. The move follows a public report revealing that these engineers often lacked the technical expertise to monitor for cybersecurity risks. For our first story, we start in the Middle East, where in a major development, Israel has announced it will allow Syrian Internal Security Forces to enter the Sweida governorate for 48 hours. Whilst Israel has long opposed the presence of regime military south of Damascus, officials now say this temporary deployment is aimed at stabilizing the region, though they've avoided calling them military forces. This comes as tribal fighters backed by the Islamist-led government clashed with Druze militias just outside of Sweida after troops withdrew under a ceasefire deal. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights confirmed violent confrontations on the city's western edge, and both sides admitted to opening fire. We're now joined by Martin Sa-Arias, who is a foreign affairs expert. He joins us live from Ecuador. Thank you very much for joining us, Martin. Martin, what are your thoughts on seemingly violence continuing even after this announced ceasefire? Martin, can you hear me? What are your views on violence continuing, seemingly coming from after reports coming from the region after this ceasefire? My apologies, we seem to have some problems there with our guest. We are talking about the situation in Syria. Hopefully Martin joins us again soon and he can hear My apologies about the technical issues we are facing. So we are talking about the ongoing situation in Syria. In a major development, Israel has announced it will allow Syrian Internal Security Forces to enter the Sweida governorate for 48 hours, while Israel has long opposed the presence of regime military south of Damascus. We're once again joined by Martin Arias, who joins us live from Ecuador. Martin, thank you very much for joining us. What are your thoughts on the fact that this fighting has once again resumed, even after this peace deal was put through yesterday?
So I think the situation in Syria has never changed after the new regime. We just see that these factions just shift their power dynamics. Now we're seeing that the regime obviously is telling the world, the new president of Syria is telling the world that he's trying to negotiate peace to stabilize the country because he wants to improve his relationships with the West. However, the factions that support the government are the factions that are killing the Druze community in southern Syria, and this is very devastating. I'm not seeing anything from the government to stop this horrible situation against the Druze community. This is a serious political fight, and hopefully the international community can force the government to do something to influence these facts that are supporting the government.
Yes, Martin, what can you tell us about the previous actions that have happened in regard to this conflict? Obviously, we've seen strikes by Israel on the center of Damascus at its military base. How do you see this conflict evolving and a possible escalation into a possible more regional conflict?
Well, the strikes from Israel were an example of deterrence. Israel is showing its superiority in bellic power, so the Syrian government can know that they are not willing with a state that they can deal with or defeat. So the Druze community is very important for Israel, for the Golan Heights. We need to remember the Druze community is very loyal to the state of Israel, and actually the Jewish community in the Middle East, they tend to be very loyal to their countries. However, since Bashar al-Assad fell, the Jewish community found themselves in a situation that the government is not aligned with their interests, and the opposite. They are being threatened and put in danger by these radical elements that are supporting the current government. So they see in Israel a hope for saving themselves, for their survival in Syria. And I think for Israel, for both parties, is a win-win. Israel will have allies in southern Syria, which is crucial for its strategy in the Golan Heights. And the Druze community will have an ally to be supported and to be defended by. So I'm seeing like a new a new type of allies, and I think the new government knows this, and they're not willing to open a war against Israel because they're not able to, and they want to be more close to the U.S.
Martin, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, has said that it is Israel's objective to reach peace by force, which is what he has said that he has achieved here. Do you think that the compelling strike on the HQ in the center of Damascus was effective in achieving his aim here, or as we can see that these clashes have once again started, do you think that they have been ineffective?
Well, I think these strikes have been actually giving results for Israeli interests, because now we're seeing that the current president of Syria is not interested in opening a war with Israel. It shows that they are not able to retaliate against, and that this government is actually going to follow what the U.S. and Israel is trying to achieve in this region, especially with the Druze community. Again, um, I think this current government of Syria is more interested in fighting the former allies of Bashar al-Assad, which is Iran in its proxies, instead of Israel. And these strikes showed that Syria is not willing to open a war with Israel, and that the Druze community is going to be supported. And in southern Syria, there won't be any escalation or any military escalation from the government, because they're actually retiring their forces. And I think the current government of Syria, even though they're not openly accepting what Israel is asking for, they are indirectly showing a type of cooperation.
Yes, Martin, we have some further updates. UN rights chief has demanded accountability and an end to violence in Syria's Sweida region after clashes reportedly left nearly 600 people dead over the past week. In a strongly worded statement, Turk called for independent, prompt and a transparent investigation into alleged violations committed by security forces, interim authority members and armed groups, including Druze and Bedouin elements. The southern city has been ravaged by sectarian violence, with reports of summary executions, looting and mass displacement. On June the 15th alone, UN monitors documented the unlawful killing of 13 civilians at a family gathering and the execution of 6 others in 2 incidents. Israeli airstrikes have targeted Syrian government forces during their brief deployment to Sweida around Damascus, saying strikes will continue until a pullout is complete. The UN warned that retaliation is not a solution and called on authorities to prioritise justice, human rights and equal protection for everyone. Let's take a look at what the UN rights chief had to say.
The bloodshed and the violence must stop, and the protection of all people must be the utmost priority in line with international human rights law. Syria's interim authorities must ensure independent, prompt and transparent investigations into all violations. All those responsible must be held to account.
We're once again joined by Martin Saar-Arias to discuss this in further detail. Martin, there are some terrible allegations here towards Syrian security forces. One of those case studies we just read out there about a family of 13 being killed, innocent civilians. What are your thoughts on the actions here of the Syrian security forces? There was previously hope for Syria in regards to the fact that it might become a democratic nation after the fall of Bashar al-Assad. However, the actions of the security forces here, they are not showing too much optimism. What are your thoughts on that?
You're absolutely right. I think, unfortunately, Syria shifts from one dictatorship to another one, and this one can be devastated for a lot of ethnic groups. We're seeing in Syria that there's a continuation of a type of genocide, actually, because these people are being targeted because of their ethnicity, not because of any ballistic strategy. They are being targeted because of being a minority that thinks differently and belongs to another ethnic social group. So it's absolutely devastating, and I think the UN, obviously, I think the UN is failing to understand the Middle East. They have the best, the UN has the best intentions to help the Middle East. However, they don't understand that in the Middle East, we're facing a lot of challenges, such as this new government that is absolutely not democratic, not pluralistic, and absolutely this government is not what a lot of people thought that will achieve peace with Israel and its neighbors. This government actually is trying to persecute the Druze minority and other ethnic groups that were former allies of the Bashar al-Assad regime, and they're just playing being a legit government. This government is actually pretending they're going to investigate this horrible massacre, but they're not going to do anything. And I think the UN should also condemn this government. And look, 600 people were killed by the government of Syria. With Israeli strikes, 6 people were killed. Obviously, this is also negative, but this is showing force and deterrence in order to support these minorities that are not being defended in Syria. So I think it's a positive move.
Martin Sar Arias, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. For our next story, we move over to Europe to discuss the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict, where the Kremlin has called a statement by a top US general suggesting NATO could seize Russia's Kaliningrad enclave hostile and dangerous. In a fiery response, Moscow said any military object inside Ukraine remains a legitimate target, including those linked to weapons supplied by Western countries. Russia insists it is obliged to take such comments seriously and will implement necessary security measures. The Kremlin has also said that it agrees with President Zelensky that talks between Kiev and Moscow need to be revived, even as the war grinds on. And while Donald Trump's latest comments on Ukraine have sparked fresh debate in Washington, the Kremlin says it doesn't see this as the end of dialogue between Russia and the US. We're now joined by Professor Veselin Popovsky, who is a professor and vice dean at Jindal Global Law School. He joins us live from Bulgaria. Thank you very much, Professor Popovsky, for joining us on the programme. How does the Kremlin's label of the NATO seizure remarks as a hostile and dangerous reflect Moscow's current threat perception towards the North Atlantic Treaty Organization?
Well, certainly for Moscow, any statement by any NATO general that will dig and find out some sort of challenge, some sort of threat, which is the kind of the tactics to explain the aggression with some sort of aggressive statement by a NATO general. Absolutely nothing surprising. The aggressor is trying to explain its aggression by some statements, some words. And that's what Russia tries to do, to legitimize, at least for some internal circles in Kremlin, in Moscow, that what they do is the right thing to do. And certainly when European Union takes some sanctions, when NATO generals take some statement that they will support Ukraine, including with military support, including with some action and movement of some troops, Russia will every time see sanctions on military movement as a threat to its security, forgetting that it was actually Russia that invaded Ukraine, exactly the opposite. The security of Ukraine is never discussed by the Russians, but the security of Russia is always discussed after every single statement. And that's the policy of propaganda. Try to explain that what you do is right and what the enemy, created enemy, NATO has never been an enemy of Russia, by the way. Never, ever a single bullet from any NATO country went to Russia for the last 75 years. Why Russia is talking about threat from NATO? When in the last 75 years, NATO shot a single bullet against Russia? Never, zero. So what threat Russians are talking about?
Yes, indeed, Professor Popovsky. We have some more updates for our viewers. Please stay with us. The Kremlin has reacted strongly to the European Union's 18th sanctions package against Russia, calling the measures illegal and asserting that Russia has developed immunity to Western economic pressure. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov stated that the sanctions no longer have the same impact on Russia as the country has adapted over the time to these restrictions. He emphasized that the new sanctions, which target Russia's oil and energy sectors, will not have the desired effect on Russia's economy. Peskov also highlighted that the sanctions are ultimately harmful to the nations backing them, suggesting that they are causing more damage to those imposing the restrictions than to Russia itself. Regarding diplomacy, Peskov stated that there are no immediate plans for a phone call between the Russian president and US President Donald Trump, although such a conversation could be arranged if necessary. Now we're once again joined by Professor Popovsky to discuss this statement coming out of Moscow. Professor Popovsky, as you know, the European Union announced its 18th sanctions package on Russia today. Moscow has now replied and said that it shows that Moscow is now immune to Western economic pressure. What are your thoughts on this statement?
Well, again, nothing surprising. Russia is trying to diminish the sanctions and saying that they will not affect much the Russian economy. Obviously, to a certain extent, that's true, because these are only sanctions imposed by the European Union and some other countries like Canada, Australia, Japan, United States, but not the rest of the world. And what Russia cannot sell to the Europeans, it goes to China and India. So, in effect, Russian oil and gas is exported to China and India, and Russia receives the revenues from those exports and can buy weapons and can buy soldiers from North Korea and can fuel the war further and further on. Unless the sanctions are global and imposed by the entire world, there will always be deficiency and gaps in that sense. But Europeans are very firm on that. Americans, Canadians, South Koreans, Japanese, they continue with the sanctions on Russia. And this is the only right thing to do. An aggressor needs to be sanctioned, simple. The problem with the sanctions is not that the European sanctions or the American sanctions do not work. These do work. They put pressure on the Russian economy. The problem is that other countries like China and Russia and India continue to buy Russian oil and gas, effectively supplying the Russian economy with the money to continue the war.
Yes, Professor Popovsky, just quickly, we had a quick statement there from the Russian spokesperson Peskov saying that there's no so far planned phone call between the Russian and the US president that's so far planned. How do you feel as if Putin is currently feeling right now in regards to his relationship with the US president? We've heard Donald Trump use some quite strong language when it comes to the Russian president nowadays and also act on it, giving him this ultimatum of 50 days or the US will impose sanctions on Russia's trading partners. What are your thoughts on what you think the Russian president is now making of the relationship he has with the US president?
Yes, Thomas, as you mentioned, obviously the Russian President Putin is not happy with what Donald Trump is saying recently, and should not be happy because Donald Trump slowly understood what to do and took a strong stand against Vladimir Putin, putting ultimatums, reminding him the ceasefire agreement, which was discussed many months ago, and Russia did not cooperate. So obviously this change of tone in Washington, D.C. is not pleasant for Vladimir Putin and Kremlin. But again, Peskov is trying to play that and say the lines are open, we are happy to talk, we don't close any connection and relationship. Russia is hopeful that Trump will continue the talks, trying to achieve an agreement, and somehow any talk with Moscow by Donald Trump in Russia is most welcome. So this is the game Russia tried to play. Again, similar to what we discussed earlier about the sanctions and about the NATO threats, is that Russia is trying to show that at least Donald Trump administration is legitimizing what Russia does in Ukraine. And for that matter, they are open for talk. They try to look constructive, but after those talks, nothing happened. So just saying that we are open for negotiations, but the negotiations deliver zero outcomes after many calls, after many meetings in Istanbul and so on, we see definitely lack of cooperation from Moscow for any progress on the Russian-Ukrainian war. And obviously Donald Trump is very frustrated himself with that lack of progress. He promised to deliver peace. He couldn't make it for 6 months, and he's frustrated with the lack of cooperation from Moscow, gradually realizing what United States should do, like everybody else in the world, in Europe, realizing. Sanction Russia, support Ukraine. That's what also Donald Trump should do here.
Yes, Professor Veselin Popovsky, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. Your insight is always very much valued. We now move to another related development where Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky held a lengthy conversation with French President Emmanuel Macron to discuss urgent defence needs on the front lines. Key focus areas included bolstering Ukraine's air defence with France backing missile supplies for the SMPT system and funding for drone interceptors. Both countries are also coordinating new defence and diplomatic steps within a broader European and transatlantic effort to deter Russia. France has agreed to expand training for Ukrainian pilots on Mirage jets, including using additional aircraft to do so. Zelensky also praised France's role in shaping the latest round of EU sanctions on Moscow, while vowing that every extra day of war will carry sharper consequences for Russia. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you.